Well, my name is Alex Lyon, and I'm the Associate Director of the Evans Center for Religious and Spiritual Values at IU Health. And I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today. We welcome Biba Tata. Biba earned her Master of Divinity at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, California, and a Master of Patient Counseling at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Biba completed CPE residencies from St. Elizabeth Psychiatric Hospital in Washington, D.C., and at Virginia Commonwealth University. While earning her MPH in Community Health Promotion at the University of Minnesota, Biba explored the religious and non-religious resources that patients with advanced illnesses use to cope, and the role of interdisciplinary teams in providing care to patients in crises and nurses coping with distress. In her spare time, Biba enjoys dancing, cooking, and walking, and she is the manager of spiritual care at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. So welcome, Biba. I also want to introduce Kim Palmer. Kim earned a Master of Divinity and Master of Science in Public Health from Emory University and has served as both a chaplain and researcher at Emory Healthcare. Although she retired from clinical care last year, congratulations, she continues to provide training in research literacy, charting and advanced directives, and conducts research within and outside of Emory. Recent areas of research include the development of emotional intelligence and competency in CPE, impacts of COVID-19 on remote learning and vaccine religious accommodation, spiritual assessment tools, and at Emory, the effect of compassion-based training and intervention on patient and chaplain well-being. In her spare time, Kim enjoys watching Star Trek, walking her 2 dogs, and recently discovered kayaking. And Kim Palmer is the manager of research projects in spiritual health at Woodruff Health Sciences Center, Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And as our sort of master of ceremonies today, we also have Shelley Varner Perez, who is our senior program manager for spiritual care research at IU Health. Shelley earned a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Master of Public Health and Epidemiology from the Joint School of Public Health at Oregon Health and Science University and Portland State University. She is an affiliated research scientist with the Center for Aging Research at the Regenstrief Institute and chaplain researcher with the Evans Center. Along with Biba and Kim, Shelley completed a Transforming Chaplaincy Research Fellowship made possible by a gift from the John Templeton Foundation. Her research interests include the spiritual needs of surrogate medical decision makers and spiritual assessment of those who are religiously unaffiliated. She is currently a PhD student at IUPUI in the School of Health and Human Sciences. In her spare time, Shelley enjoys hiking at Indiana state parks. Okay, without further ado, I'll turn it over to each of you for this wonderful time.
Thank you, Alex. It's good to be with you all today. I am the leader of the ceremonies, I suppose, and so we are going to take some time to hear from Biba and Kim each a bit about how research helps them be a better chaplain and might help all of us as well. And then I have a few questions, a bit like a panel conversation, and we will have ample time for all of you in the room and on Zoom to ask your questions of our esteemed guests. So Biba, would you like to get us started with some comments on how research helps me be a better chaplain?
Yes, thank you so much. I am so glad and honored to be here today. I love the weather, it's so good out. So that's a good point. I always like to start with something that gives me joy, something that has been giving me joy in the past weeks. Shelley, can you go to the next 2 slides? So this is my team. or part of my team engaged in a glass artwork for our Joy project. So every year, Mayo Clinic gives funding to departments to do a Joy project, something that's going to help with their well-being. So this year, I decided to do it for my team because we've been bringing joy to other teams. We've been doing so many activities to give people joy. So this year we said, let's do something that is going to feed our soul, that is just going to help with our own well-being. One of the activities was this raising glass art, very engaging and very that was my first time of doing anything with glass. So they brought shattered glass and I said, what am I going to do with this? But I ended up doing a bird. So in addition, we're also doing salsa and Tai Chi. So we have someone coming to teach us those two things. And it's just fun. After a hard day, we go out and do these activities and it helps to replenish us. All right. Let's go now to the more serious stuff. Evidence-based practice. So when I first came into chaplaincy, I knew my work was just going to be at the bedside, to journey with people, to accompany people, to listen to their stories. Then I came across spiritual care research. And I said, oh, wow, this is interesting. And that is when I was doing my second residency at the Virginia Commonwealth University. We were tasked to do research on organizational culture.
At the same time.
What was that?
Oh, somebody is not muted, just not muted, but you can keep going.
Oh, okay. So that was my first encounter with spiritual care research. The topic itself was not really spiritual care, but they just wanted us to understand the different cultures of the different units that chaplains were involved in the hospital. So I just used to know, okay, I'm working in the ICU, I'm covering the cardiac unit, and my other colleagues are covering other areas, maybe the psych unit. But after that research, I had a deeper understanding of what it meant as a chaplain to be working in either an acute area or in the emergency department or in the cardiac areas that I was covering. It made a difference because I thought the workflow was different for each chaplain depending on your area that you're working at. And the intensity of the patients that come maybe in the ICU with all the machines and families walking in and seeing their loved ones on the bed, surrounded by those machines, it made a difference, the kind of requests that we would have in those areas and the kind of care that we would provide. And in addition to that, we also looked at chaplains' chart notes. I said, who is even seeing those notes? Do they read it and do they include it in the plan of care of the patient? So that really got me interested in research. And that's when I decided, oh, I think I really want to start not just being a chaplain at the bedside, but to also look at the other things that would improve patient outcomes. And this is just what the next slide is saying, right? When we look at evidence, it helps us to see how does it improve patient outcomes? How do we maybe avoid the things that are not really necessary in the processes that we are doing? We might say, oh, we've always done it this way. But what if we do it this other way? So we are just called as chaplains to be empowered to use these resources to improve our own work. Then evidence-based spiritual care, and I'm sure most of us as chaplains, we've come across this. It's just the use of scientific evidence on spirituality to inform the decisions and interventions that we are doing. And when I attended an APC conference once, a friend of mine shared with me research that they are doing in one hospital in North Carolina about using guided imagery for COPD patients and how it was helping with anxiety. I took that, when I went back from that conference, I took it to my hospital, and it wasn't research, but I just said, let me try this. Let me try using the guided imagery for that patient population. And it was working, and it's just amazing how research can inform the practice, but it can also generate new questions for further research. Because when we started doing the guided imagery for patients, we had new questions like, oh, we don't want you to read it in the book, we just want to hear the chaplain's voice. Some said, no, we just want to hear the audio. We don't want to be able to listen. And I know one patient even said to me, can you just do this? And I want to record it so that when I go back home after I'm discharged, I'm going to be listening to your voice because it's so calming. So we had different questions that could open other possibilities for further research. So research literacy. And research chaplain is just like giving that opportunity for chaplains to be able to read, understand, and summarize research studies and to explain its relevance to either their colleagues or to other people who are not chaplains. And our standard of professional care for those who are maybe board certified by APC, we have these standards that are calling all chaplains to be research literate. Next one. And there are 3 levels. It could either be basic, intermediate, or advanced. And for basic, it's just that call to be able to understand, as I said before, and to explain it to others. So sometimes we say, who is a chaplain? What do we do? What value do we bring? Because sometimes I know in my experience in the past, people ask me, oh, where is a chaplain? This patient just needs prayer. But one day I was talking to a nurse and they said, I don't really understand what chaplains do. I just know I can call you to come say prayer for those who are religious. What happens to the other patients who are not religious? And I had to help them understand that no, chaplains bring care not only to those who are religious, but more and more people are saying that I'm nothing, I'm spiritual, or I don't have anything at all, I don't believe in anything. So what do we do with those people? So understanding what we bring as a value to patients, to all patients. And then intermediate is just like creating that opportunity to be able to actually get our feet wet with doing research. And advanced is like functioning as either a principal or a co-investigator. And I think each one of us, Kim and Shelley, will have the opportunity to be principal investigators or co-investigators in many studies. Then why is all this important? I think this is just what I've said before, so we can skip this slide. Now, why is research important? It's so tiny, I cannot even see myself. I bring this slide here because it always brings me back to what are those things that when I'm doing research, how is it helping me? How is it informing my practice? So understanding and knowing what others are doing for me is very important. Sometimes we say as chaplains, oh, we don't have so many interventions, or people ask us, what do you really provide? What is unique with what you bring as a chaplain? So for me, it has been like understanding what kinds of interventions we bring has been very helpful over the years. And so it also says there that research sparks creativity. That has worked a lot for me. It has opened doors for me for many opportunities. And I always say, out of one conversation, so many things can happen. I was engaged with a physician once, and we're talking about spiritual distress. And they were asking me to help them to understand the indicators of spiritual distress, so that what do I need to see to be able to call a chaplain? So I gave a presentation about that to a group of physicians. And the next thing I knew, they were inviting me to do a systematic review with them about the value of spiritual care in inpatient settings. And that paper has been published. So it was just from that one conversation that these discussions about research can provide and open these opportunities for us. So today I'm just going to be talking about how research has helped me to provide better staff care. It has helped me in many ways for patient care, but I think as a spiritual care leader right now, I'm more focused on staff care, my day-to-day activities. So there are these 2 papers, these 2 research that I looked at. This Mount Sinai Center for Spirituality, they did something called a Chi-Cart Ministry, and Cleveland Clinic did the Code Lavender, and they both involved active programs with tea, like bringing tea to different work areas within the hospital, and the outcomes so that it brought calmer presence, it brought gratitude and emotional resources to staff, and it just provided a time to relax and decompress. So when I saw this, I transferred from Mayo Clinic, Rochester to Jacksonville. When I was talking with staff doing my rounding, and I asked people, what can we do for you? What can chaplains do for you? And they kept saying, we need a vacation. We need PTO. And I said, I can't provide that. But when I went back to my office, I said, the common theme that I'm hearing from what people are saying is, we need rest. So I said, what about if I bring rest to where people are at? But these two studies that I had seen before really informed that, because I saw, well, it brought this calmer presence. It will help them to relax and to decompress. So I said, maybe doing these pop-up events of Tea for the Soul will help people. So yeah, so it was implementing now this program for meaningful uplifting break from difficult day, and that's how we started the Tea for the Soul. Yeah, you can go to the next. Here are a few pictures. So our Tea for the Soul included rolling this cart full of pastries, assorted tea, hot water to the units, and sometimes it was accompanied by music. So the picture to the right, well, to my right and maybe to your left, is just that moment where I used to say, handing someone that cup of water, that cup, and pouring hot water for them. To me, that's a magical moment. To me, that's saying, we see you, we affirm you, and we thank you for all that you are doing. And that's what I usually say when I'm handing someone that cup. So yes, it brought those moments of rest, moments of restoration for the staff. And because I saw this from research, it also inspired me to do something that in case another institution wanted to do something like this, they would also fall back and say, okay, when they did this, what were the outcomes? And so we put a survey in every event that we go to. We bring this survey where we ask people, when you are interacting with this Tea for the Soul card, how does that reduce your stress? And yes, 96% of people were reporting that interacting with the Tea for the Soul card will help them feel less stressful. 98% said it was so helpful they want to see it offered more often. One person said, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm in a first-class flight. Could you do this for us every day? Well, we can, but not every day, but you could call us. If there's a stressful event going on in the unit, you can call us all the time. So in our spiritual care website, we have a form there where people can fill out to request for that. And then 94% of people also responded that that was one way of Mayo Clinic showing that Mayo Clinic cares about them. That's just another picture of the Tea for the Soul event. And then another activity that we did was, we call it SOS, which means supporting our staff. And this included creating well-being rooms in work areas. And the research idea that inspired this for me was a paper that one person did about healthcare workers taking short breaks. I say it was so important because taking these breaks will refuel them, enhance their well-being, so that by the time they are going to the next activity, I mean, they have some energy. So we create these rooms, we stack it with snacks. Next, we'll have the picture. Yeah, so this is what we do. A lot of chocolate. But also we have blank gratitude cards. We invite people to write thank you notes to friends, to their colleagues, to the family members. And we have a gratitude, I don't have a picture of the gratitude wall of gratitude here. And we have small vehicle boards where people could write or draw things. Interesting, we provide small easels that they can put those on their desk and will give it to others as gifts. And it's so interesting when you go around the hospital and you see those small easels on people's desk, and they're just looking at them each day, and that really enhances their well-being. We also put, sorry for the busy slide. We also put questions in the SOS rooms, and we were trying to measure the stress. So you see the first graph up there. We asked people the question, before using this space, what was your stress level? So you see how it was towards, on a sliding scale, with 0 meaning no stress, and with 10 meaning extreme stress. So see the numbers before people use the space. So it was tilted towards 7, like see 7 is the highest, 7, 8, 9, 10. But after people used the space, it started moving backwards towards the lower numbers. So it was very interesting. We found that there was a decrease in stress levels. And then to the right is just a qualitative feedback. People got that sense of connection and compassion. And that is what we wanted, because we were seeing, we're doing this in the middle of the pandemic, and there was a lot of isolation. And so people just said they felt this sense of reconnection again to others, knowing that others are using this space as well as emotional support, and knowing that this space is therapeutic for them. Next. the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the short rounds. There's a ton of information out there about short rounds. There's this forum where caregivers come together to talk about the social and emotional aspects of the care that they give every day. And so it was again to reduce that team isolation and to increase connectedness among staff. So many people after doing the short rounds are reporting that there's a sense of well-being and connectedness. Let's skip this slide because it's too busy. So I think that is all I can say. That's how research has helped me to provide better staff care. And I know that when we provide care to staff, it automatically translates to better quality of patient care. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Biba.
You're welcome.
Let me see if I can stop sharing here. Kim, I believe you're up to share a bit about how research helps you be a better chaplain.
Okay, thanks. And thanks, Biba, for that. And it's good to be here with you all. So I have a couple of stories that I can tell about how research articles that I read really impacted the care that I gave. But I want to begin with a little story about when I first began in the Transforming Chaplaincy Fellowship. Our cohort of 8 chaplains had gotten together. And one of my peers had said, oh, I read an article. I try to read 2 articles a week. And I thought, okay, 2 articles a week. And he said, and that way, every year I've read 100 articles. And I thought, wow, imagine how much knowledge you would gain if you read 100 articles a year, you know, all the little bits and pieces of information that you could glean from that. Now that seemed a little bit daunting to me, but I thought, well, you know, if you did 1 a week, that's 50 a year. You know, if you do, you know, only every other week, it's still almost 25. And even 1 a month is 12. So what I sort of got from that was that it's helpful as a chaplain to have a practice of routine reading of scientific articles in the field. So sort of get an idea about what research is out there, what other people are finding, what other people are doing as standard practice, and to get ideas for some of your own work. So a couple of examples of how that worked for me is I took a summer introduction to research class at Duke University some years ago. And there was one person who was scheduled to come in and speak on a topic, and I forget what had happened. The person had a personal emergency and was not able to come lead that section of the class. And so somebody else stepped in and just talked about a study that she had done. And this was Jill Hamilton out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she talked about a study that she had done in a publication that she had authored in 2012, which was published in the Gerontologist. And it was called, You Need a Song to Bring You Through, the Use of Religious Songs to Manage Stressful Life Events. And she spoke about having interviewed a number of elderly African-American people throughout North Carolina. And she was interested in finding out whether or not they had a religious song or scripture or prayer, which she covered in separate papers. But this particular paper was on whether they had a particular religious song that helped them cope with a stressful life event. So she asked, can you tell me about a time in your life when you were under unusual stress? Did you have a religious song that helped you get through that? And how did it help you? And what she found was every single person that she asked had a song that came immediately to mind. And even one person, as soon as she asked the question, he began singing. So these were things that were very close to people's hearts. In her study, she was able to sort of analyze what songs people had raised as being important to them and found that they fell into a number of sort of discrete categories. There were songs of thanksgiving and praise, which were the most common. There were songs that were instructive or, you know, that gave instructions on how to live your life or how to deal with adversity. Songs that were communication or prayers to God. Songs that reflected a belief in life after death. And also songs that she sort of referred to as legacy songs, which were songs that evoked memories of your forefathers or foremothers. So for example, she would say that one person had talked about a song that was very important because their grandmother used to sing it when she was baking in the kitchen. And as a child, they would go, helped the grandmother bake. So these were things that were deeply held and were able to provide a lot of comfort. So it was sometime after I had read that article and heard about it from the author that I was at Emory in one of the ICUs, and we have a system layout where all of the IC rooms are in the middle, and then around the perimeter of that area is the waiting room. So each family has an individual space in this perimeter hallway outside their person's room. And then also along the perimeter, there are a couple of common areas where multiple families can gather. And when I was walking through the waiting area, I came across a family that seemed to be in a lot of distress. And I introduced myself. And the mother in that family said that her husband was in the room actively dying. And she had been trying to call up his favorite hymn on her cell phone, but she was unable to get connectivity. Now, at our hospital, we had a Verizon repeater. And so if you had Verizon as a service, you had great connection. But if you had any other cell phone service, it was hard to get connectivity, hard to get service. And oftentimes when people would talk about having difficulty getting telephone reception, I would direct them to the wings where the reception was good, or tell them the nearest door where they could get outside and get reception so that they could go ahead and make their call or do whatever they needed to do. But because I had read this article, I had the immediate sense of how, and this was an African-American family, I had an immediate sense of how important this song might be within her family and within her culture. And so I asked her what the song was, and perhaps I'd be able to find it on my cell phone because I did have service. I was able to call up the song. She carried my phone into the room with her husband and held it up next to her ear and played it. And you could just see the tension in the room come down. And they had expressed so much gratitude to me after that, saying that they felt like they were able to give their husband or father a good death because they'd been able to fill this need. And I don't know if I hadn't read this article, if I really would have recognized the immediacy and the urgency and sort of the cultural importance of being able to play this song during the husband's death. So that was one where reading an article had sort of an immediate and lasting impact on the way I do my practice. One other story I'll just tell briefly is that there's another article by three authors, Lee, Curlin, and Choi, who are all medical professionals, either doctors or I think interns at the time, or medical residents. And they had published an article in 2017 in Palliative and Supportive Care called Documenting Presence, a descriptive study of chaplain notes in the intensive care unit. So these doctors had gone back through and were trying to get an idea about what is it that chaplains are putting in their chart notes and how is it helpful or not helpful. And the thing that I really remembered and took to heart from this article was the doctor's findings that, for one thing, the chaplains used a lot of what they called coded language, where the chaplain would say something like provided emotional and spiritual support to the patients or provided ministerial presence that seemed like they were placeholders for some larger type of care that had happened that was not being fully described and that they weren't sure what that meant. And it sort of felt to them like all of these things were equivalent to saying the chaplain was here, and they didn't really know what was further or behind that. They also noted that the chaplain chart notes tended to be descriptive rather than interpretive. So they would see things like the patient has a large family, but not anything about what that might mean in terms of the patient's needs or care or resources, or descriptions of what happened in the room. They gave an example. Patient's mother was standing next to daughter, holding her hand, and patient's father was sitting next to the patient, holding her hand and stroking her forehead. So a lot of detail about what happened in the room, a lot of he said, she said kind of stuff, but not a lot of interpretation. They wanted to know what's the significance of what the chaplain had found, what is the assessment of the patient's needs or of the resources, or ways that the medical staff could bring the spiritual kind of aspects, what they needed to do in order to enhance care. They also commented that there tended to be very passive follow-up plans. Instead of having, the chaplain's going to come back on a certain date and do a follow-up or within a certain time frame. A lot of the chaplain chart notes had said, inform patient how to request further spiritual care if needed. So everything was sort of left up to the patient to reinitiate. And they commented that the chaplains were able to provide a lot of insight on relationship dynamics. So these things are probably familiar to the people in the audience today, and they certainly were to me when I read this article. And Emory was right on the cusp of redesigning our chart note. And we really took this to heart and tried to lay out our chart note in a way that had kind of like a step through a process that maybe the other disciplines might use, where we say the context of the call. How is it that you came to see that patient? Was it a referral? Was it a code? Were you just doing routine rounding? What is your assessment, the patient's emotional state, the resources they have, the types of distress that they have and what's causing it? What interventions did you do? What outcomes came from those interventions? And then what kind of follow-up was being planned? Did the patient need to be seen again, and on what time frame? So Emory has actually just this past Saturday had their go live event where we've moved from Cerner to Epic in our charting. So there's lots of yeah, bless you, yeah. Lots of kind of tension and anxiety around that. But one of the things I think that has really helped our charting and helped our process of moving over to Epic is this kind of this conceptual focus on what did I find that was important for the medical staff to know? What did I do and what was the outcome? And being able to communicate those things. So of course, it's in our natures to want the narrative and maybe even include some of that narrative to humanize the patient, maybe to provide information that's helpful if I follow myself back to a patient or if another chaplain follows me. But some of these kind of more concrete steps about what did I find? What does it mean to the team? What did I do? And what was the outcome? A lot of that was based on what we had learned or begun reflecting on from this article. So just a couple of examples from me about ways that I read things that had an impact either on my own care or really on the care of our whole system. And my appreciation for a practice of regular article reading, where bit by bit I begin to build up a knowledge base based on what others have done. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Biba. So I have a few questions for our panel here, but also I'm happy to take questions from folks in Zoom or folks in the room. And I've asked Alex to monitor the chat for us and let me know or let us know what questions come through. So in the meantime, I'll start with a question. Biba or Kim, what is the most gratifying aspect of research for you?
So Biba and I think this is funny because we have opposite answers. In kind of an odd way, the thing that I find most gratifying about the research is seeing what happens with the numbers. I like quantitative research. I love running the statistical analyses.
Like really loves it. Loves it. Like it's, oh yes, I have some data.
Yeah, this stuff makes me come alive. And I find too that this aspect of research really helps feed kind of the intellectual numbers side of me, while the actual patient care helps feed the heart side, so that I get both in heart.
And I am the direct opposite. I am the qualitative girl. I love the stories. To me, the experience and entering into people's experiences makes it just, it's so impactful that, I don't know, when I do that, I send the numbers to Kim to crunch them, but I like to hear and the stories that people have. For example, during the pandemic, I was involved in a study where we asked chaplains to chart in real time about their experiences of how they're doing spiritual care in a pandemic. The stories were powerful, and I think that paper has been published. Right? I don't even remember which paper.
The journals?
Yes, yeah, the journal, the Chaplain journal paper. So it was very powerful. So when I read that, it speaks to me. It speaks to the soul of what I do as a chaplain. So I know that I am a chaplain researcher, and I don't want to focus only in the head. So when I do research that talks about people's experiences, to me, that's where I find the balance of being a chaplain and of being a researcher. So that's been very helpful for me.
And if I ask myself, that's what I really like about it too, actually, is the bringing together of the head and the heart.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so it sounds like we all do that. We're just from different sides.
Yeah.
Different ways. Would you say that conducting research is itself a spiritual care intervention?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think the answer is it can be. And I think about some research that we did at Emory where we were surveying patients throughout the hospital on what their sources of distress were. And we had a list of like 40 things, and just people had to answer yes or no. Was this something that you were experiencing to the degree that it was burdening your heart while you were in the hospital? And it was everything from, I'm away from my family, or I can't connect with my communities, to I'm feeling frustrated or angry or sad, to I feel disconnected from God, or I feel like God is punishing me. So we had a big range of potential stressors. And it was interesting to ask folks, and you would ask a question, that we had, I did some of the surveying. So of course I have the chaplaincy hat and skills, but we also had just a research coordinator who was not a chaplain, not particularly associated with chaplaincy, who would also ask the questions. And we all found that we would ask a question about, are you experiencing, for example, sadness? And somebody would say, oh yes, I'm so sad. My husband died a year ago. I'm nearing the anniversary of his death. And they would speak about that. And then you say, okay, so the next question, are you feeling frustrated? Oh, my frustration is just through the roof because since my husband's death, my children have just kind of vanished from my lives. I think they had some conflict with them. And, and here would come more stories. So even the act of administering the survey was an opportunity for these patients to think about their own emotional and spiritual state, to be able to express it and to, in a way, receive care. Not necessarily targeted care, but somebody to listen and absorb their story and record it. And I think that was helpful. So in a lot of ways, I think actually doing the research itself can serve as an intervention and help the patients.
I would say yes as well, that it could be, and my answer would be exactly like what you're saying, but from a different study that I was involved in. There's a Hear My Voice study that we did with patients with neurological diseases and mostly brain tumor. And it was asking them questions about their life experiences. And what intrigued me in that study is because we touched on the importance of how the people's faith have helped them. We touched on their experiences of the coping that they have and the challenges that they are having in their life. So current ways of coping and what helps them in the past. And we also ask questions about the dignity therapy, like just giving people meaning, people are finding meaning and purpose at the end of life. So it was like 14 questions. The first time that I interviewed patients, I was so scared. I was like rigid, just going from question to question. Then after that, upon reflection, I said, wow, I looked at the questions again. I said, yes, I might be going there as a researcher. But when I looked at the questions, I said, some of them just talking about those experiences was really like cathartic for some of them. So I think it was a therapeutic moment. It was research, but it was also kind of providing spiritual care because it gave opportunity for people to talk about those things that were challenging and also talk about the ways that they were coping. So I would say, yeah, research can be that as well.
Thank you.
And Shelley, I think there's a question from Joseph in the chat to the second question, when is research not? So if I understand the question, Joseph, I think it's, are there times when research is not spiritual care?
Yeah, correct, yes.
Yeah, I'll answer that. And I think there certainly are. That probably happens more in quantitative research than qualitative. But certainly if you're, encountering a series of patients in a particular population or a clinic, and your questions are sort of less story gathering and more concrete data gathering, like demographics and maybe, what's your religion? How often do you go to church? What other spiritual practices do you engage in? some of those things might not necessarily elicit that type of cathartic storytelling or expression of that real internal immediate experience that they're having at that moment.
Say also, if there's a time that we in a research process asked a patient or family to enumerate their spiritual pain or spiritual distress and then don't do anything to respond to that to help care for them, that might be absent. I mean, spiritual care might be absent in that scenario, right? And so there wouldn't actually be sort of a supportive resource or intervention or means of responding. I think it's hard to ask people to disclose about being in physical or emotional or spiritual pain and then not follow up with that in some way, right? I think spiritual care would be absent if we did that.
Yeah, that actually points out sort of the difference between the research part and the chaplaincy part. So as a researcher going into the room, you need to be mindful not to sort of influence the person's answers. So you're just strictly kind of in a dry, mechanical way collecting the data. But what you might do after the data is complete and now your data cannot be modified at all by anything further that happens, that might be the time then to provide some care in the room and say, I noticed that you rated yourself very high on the loneliness scale. Would you like to talk about what's going on for you or how that's been for you in the hospital, right? And then you can open a conversation as a chaplain that you can't necessarily have while you're doing the actual collection of data as a researcher.
Yes, Varner.
Well, I get concerned sometimes that in our research, we find ourselves actually doing the research and the investigation and the assessment. And I get concerned that sometimes we're in that predicament where the person shares with us and we're the person doing the assessment, and it's a chaplain. We can't take that off our badge or anything. And I'm just wondering, what are you all experiencing? What are you all experiencing? Because I don't want to sway the results. I don't want to influence the results. I want high validity. And then that means getting collegial buy-in from other disciplines. So what's your all's experience with that? And am I just being overly concerned or?
I don't think so, because I have also discovered that it's challenging when you go in with a dual role as being a chaplain in the one hand and being a researcher in the other. I know from a qualitative research background is you come into the research making sure you know what you're bringing, you know who you are, your own identity as a researcher. So we don't take it up, but we come with it and being conscious of that, knowing that this is who I am coming into this research. And you don't want to influence it in a way that the patient might say, oh, this is my chaplain, I need to give them all the answers that they want. And that might skew the results, right? But it's going to be like, we have stick to the research hard. I've had to stop the recording sometime and provide spiritual care, so that I don't mix the research and me being a chaplain. So after I finish with the research questions and I stop the recording, I provide spiritual care after that. So that's one of the ways that I've been able to find that fine line not to cross over.
We were really aware of this during the post-code study too. So like we ideally there would be enough staff that somebody who's a non-chaplain would conduct all the interviews with the team members who were in those post-code debriefs, right? So that there wouldn't be this sort of bias of, oh, well, I don't want to make the chaplain feel bad, or I want to give an answer that the chaplain would like when they're interviewing me because I know there's another chaplain on the other end of the line. But what we did to sort of balance the staffing piece with being sensitive to that is if we had a scenario in which, for instance, I led the debrief, I would not conduct any of the interviews because that would not be appropriate. Then they would be telling me about their satisfaction level with something that I provided. So Sarah Banks, our research assistant, who's not a chaplain, would be the one to conduct those interviews. And it was always our priority that if Sarah was available, Sarah did the interviews with our staff people. And if for some reason Sarah wasn't available and I was not the one that led the debrief, then I would do the interviews. But we really try to prioritize separating, especially an interview on the qualitative side of things, that piece. So
It'd be interesting to look at those assessments that Sarah did versus the ones you didn't see. Where's there's congruency, where there's incongruency?
are you trying to add another paper to my pile?
No.
I'm just teasing. Go for it. Yeah, Alex.
To continue that theme of maybe challenges, barriers, complexities in research. Question from Marcos here. Can you speak to challenges and barriers in conducting research on pediatric spirituality and chaplaincy? Related to that is the second question he asks, is there a connection to the scarcity of literature related to pediatric spiritual assessment models?
Able to speak for that.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't have any experience in pediatrics, so I don't, I can't speak to the challenges there. But I do know that there is, under the Transforming Chaplaincy kind of umbrella, there are some networks of people who are interested in particular study areas. And I believe one of those is pediatrics.
Yes.
So chaplains who are interested in that can kind of form their own community and talk with each other about, have you seen any studies or have you heard about anything that's going on? Or what do you guys do in your hospital versus what do we do in mine? And that's a way of sort of sharing information within our field anyway. But yeah, any place where you don't have a great deal of research already in the literature or in a body of knowledge, I think that does make it difficult to sometimes to know where to start or to know where to go to get the information that you want to improve your own practice.
Another piece that's a barrier or challenge is just that from an institutional review board perspective, minors, those under 18, are a population that's considered vulnerable. So there have to be like added layers of protection, often modifications to the way support is provided, or like, I'm not gonna give a survey to a 7-year-old that says, do you have high spiritual distress right now, right? And so there's a variety of considerations. And so I don't know about the two of you, but I would reach out to one of my colleagues in pediatric research, Daniel Grossoday or others,
yeah.
Kate Desjardins, and really utilize their knowledge and resources, because one of the things I've learned that I continue to remind myself is I don't have to be an expert at everything. Part of it is knowing who to ask. It's just like chaplaincy, right? Like if I'm gonna go do a visit on neurocritical care and I'm not that familiar with neuro patients and there's sort of an in-depth situation, that's where I phone another chaplain and say, oh, you have a lot more experience in neurocritical care. What do I need to know? And so it's sort of the same way in chaplaincy research. Hey, this is more your area of expertise, or you have more experience here. How can you help? So I hope that answers your question, Marcos, to the extent that we're able.
There is a comment and a question from two different people. I'll read the comment first. I don't know who is on iPhone, but they say, what helped me most to stay objective as the research chaplain was the training I received and instructions. And related to, that theme of training, there's a question from Diana. Did learning the quantitative terms and making meaning of data come easily to you?
Yeah.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the spectrum right here, right?
It doesn't come easy to me when I pick up a paper and I look at the numbers and I say the p-value is this, the p-value is that, or the covariate, and I get confused. I try to go to the discussion section and to see what they're going to explain about those numbers. That is where I get the help from. I'm like, what are they really talking about? So I don't understand these numbers. Or I'll call Kim. Have you seen this paper? What are they talking about?
And I'll add to that it wasn't easy to get there. It took a lot of a lot of time and effort. through the classwork and also just through repeated exposure, reading different articles, seeing what they say in the conclusion section about what you've seen in the tables. It helps to have somebody who's knowledgeable kind of step through a few reports with you to say, this is what they're trying to accomplish in this table. This is what the numbers mean. But yeah, I would say that's kind of hard-won knowledge and expertise.
I'd say it's a way that I have found to connect with medical colleagues who do have more training and research. Like it's another way to speak the language of others who are potentially recipients of our care if we're thinking about staff care and saying, oh, hey, here's this new article, there's these pieces, and to be able to speak that language and speak in terminology that folks are more familiar with than some of the spiritual care coded lingo that Kim was talking about, I think can be really helpful. So I think that's one thing that's enhanced my sort of staff care ministry is actually sort of learning this other terminology and language that's important in our healthcare systems.
Did you? I keep seeing it.
Sure.
Yeah, I can ask it later.
Oh, well, first, thanks so much for the presentations, really rich. Two questions. The first, I found myself chuckling about and really inspired Kim by the story at Emory of the physician's take on Chaplain's notes and your work with it. And my chuckle was about how risk averse the institution I worked for 30 years was for Chaplain notes. The apocryphal story was some chaplain wrote a really terrible note, and we were nearly banned from writing ever again. So the more opaque our notes could be, the happier the administrators were. So, do you think you guys will be doing some research about your new charting practice to share with us?
Yeah, I love the way everybody has lots of ideas for papers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For you to do, not
Yeah,
me to do.
no, I get it.
Not Shelley.
And this is actually an occupational hazard of being a chaplain in research. Everything is interesting, right?
Sure.
There's so much that we want to research and study. I would say the chance for that at Emory is low because Emory actually has a very robust research program on that's in a different direction, and a lot of the resources are going toward that.
Okay.
But at some point, if there are additional people or students in the school or even nursing students or something who want to explore something like that, I think having stuff in Epic now really lends itself to being able to extract data easily for analysis.
I think that'd be a helpful, important piece. The other question is way different, but I was at a conference.
Can I add something to what Kim just said?
Thank you,
So
yeah.
talking about if they are planning to do any research, last year I did a quality improvement with my team on documentation and using that paper that Kim referenced and another paper, the taxonomy, just to shift from that coded language and to helping chaplains to communicate in a language that other providers will be able to understand and know that, oh, a chaplain was here, yes, but this is what happened when a chaplain was here. And this is what we as the other clinicians can know about this patient that we did not know about. So it was really good because we brought all those resources together and tried to really make our notes clearer.
That's very
Yeah, but it was
exciting.
Quality improvement project,
Right.
not full research.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
The other question is related to communication, but on the other side of it, I do a lot of work in the community these days with people of faith, and was at a all-day conference this week on aging, spirituality, and issues around racism. And the topic was, one of the topics was the distance between public health and religious liberty these days, and how these are pointed against each other, and very frequently people will use matters of faith to discount science, especially public health science. Are you finding, for any one of you in your own research or in the spiritual care literature, ways to speak more broadly to people in the pews, if you will, about how science and faith don't need to be at odds with each other, but could inform each other. So in other words, one of our important publics is the medical providers, but the other important public are our faith leaders who are at sea with this. And there may not, just curious.
That's not a body of literature that I'm familiar with or have seen. Probably the closest is that I'm working on a study with another group that's looking at the responses of chaplains who are in departments where they're either participating in decision-making or they're the decision maker about granting or not granting religious exemptions for people who don't want to get the COVID-19 vaccine. And early, I'm mindful that this is being recorded, and this stuff is not public yet, but I think early kind of analysis of this has suggested that there's some real deep moral distress and conflict that arises with chaplains who want the staff to be cared for and want people to be protected, but and want people with legitimate, religious waivers to be able to get them, but some frustration and some moral difficulty about people who are going on the internet and grabbing the buzzwords and then coming in with something where they're covering it in a religious exemption, but really what their issue is political.
It's a great example of how these worlds collide.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I couldn't paste it.
Nothing to add.
Thank you, Jay.
Just a few comments in the chat. Super rich presentation. Thank you so much. And then also that was from Tanya, and then from Melissa. As a nurse, I truly appreciate the staff-focused projects. Thank you for sharing.
Welcome.
Thank you, Alex.
One thing I hope will eventually happen is that when we talk about research, we do tend to talk about we're working with folks who are other than us or others. And I look at it, we are doing research to become stronger participants in the places we serve, in the communities in which we work. We do this to enhance our connection within healthcare, so that we become part of what we've termed as other than us, because we kind of stood outside. And I think it's where we strengthen our identity within healthcare.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I agree that doing the research helps us with our connections within healthcare, and not only improving our own practice through best practices research, but also just the act of being engaged in that within a healthcare setting helps bring us into the world of the other providers.
Professional identity piece is what I hear you speaking to as well.
I agree. I was in a meeting yesterday with a group of physicians and others, because we recently got the 100,000 grants to do a demonstration project for the feasibility of generalist spiritualist care, a model of care. And it really brought to mind for me that this is a chaplain sitting at the same table. I remember when we started research, when we became Transforming Chaplaincy Fellows, we said, we want to sit on that table. We want to be able to contribute. We want to be able to have a voice within the larger healthcare institutions. And to me, yesterday really came together and said, this is a chaplain sitting at the same table with physicians, with social workers, with nurses, having a common conversation, using common language about what we want to do to improve the quality of spiritual care. That was very interesting, that other people coming together to talk about the quality of spiritual care that we want to start providing, with the outcome of saying they are also going to participate, because we can't talk about whole person care without bringing in the spiritual dimension. So that, to me, that is very important. Yeah.
And for me, improving the quality of spiritual care means we're improving the quality of care.
Right?
Yes.
It's a holistic piece.
Yes.
but we're not standing over against our healthcare providers. I think chaplains have had a tendency to want to be, well, we're spiritual people, and you know, and a little bit different way that's not helpful. So finding this common language, BB, I appreciate your invitation for the importance of that. I agree 100%.
Well, I want to thank you all for making time today. Thank you to the Evans Center for hosting this conversation, and Alex for making introductions, and emceeing today, Gloria for setting things up, Jay and Vern for being here, and others who are on Zoom. Thank you so much, and I hope this is the beginning of a continued conversation, because there's still lots more to learn, right? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Michael.